Hi friends, host Eric here, host of Talking with Famous People, and I'd like to talk today about the progression of human history as understood through cognitive functions and through our respective competing understandings of truth. We had a really good conversation last night here on Talking with Famous People, in which we discussed the role of NI and any in understanding truths and what they mean and what's the difference and such stuff like that. And also whether or not objects have attributes that persist beyond the subjective understanding of them or that have a reality beyond our subjective understanding of them. So, let's first point out that you could easily enough think of human history as an ongoing competition between NE and NI understandings of the world. NI will establish that things ought to be such. TE will attempt to codify that, and then NE disrupts it and says, but if that's the case, then this is the case. But if that's the case, then this is the case. And TE attempts to get around this by saying, I guess it's TI in conjunction with NE is the disrupting function, like in that function, in that capacity. And then the TE tries to get around this by playing what if. Well, what if this happens? Well, then we need an exception. Well, what if this happens? We need an exception. Any TI hates that shit. It's this ongoing battle between core values we all recognize as true and exceptions to those core values that we all recognize as true. Core truths of all sorts that we all can say, yes, it's obviously true. And then we get into huge fights about how we derived that truth and what that means and all the other stuff, right? So, when we look at human history as a progression of a battle between NE and NI, we can see various cultures in which NITE won and various cultures in which NETI won. The West is an odd hybrid, but for the most part, NETI has won. A culture like a Muslim culture, which explains why I hate Muslim culture so much, is an example of TENI completely winning and NE being relegated to always parsing, NETI being always relegated to parsing down and in, never up and out, right? By locking in, codifying the core truths, you render them untrue necessarily because they're codified now, and that ruins the truth. And then you compel any TI types to do their business within that framework. But NETI doesn't want to operate within that framework. It doesn't want to operate within any framework. It wants to always challenge the framework. And this is important. So, where do we run into problems in the West? Let's focus now on the West. We've got a situation now where we have a world that is driven in America, let's say specifically, by good, sound, fundamental NI style principles. Okay? Remember, it's not the principle that the NETI objects to, it's the codification of it and the necessary wrongness in any codified version of a real truth. And so we have these wonderful, perfect, great NI principles that can guide us. They're simple. They're rights-driven stuff, right? It's, I own my body. It's simply and obviously true. But NETI types, what do we want to do? We want to parse the living shit out of that to prove that it's not true. Why? It's obviously true. But okay, it doesn't matter. The fact is, as long as we can do that, we will, and it's not sound. Well, what I am attempting to do right here and now, in this moment, and for all of Talking with Famous People, is to do the only thing that we can to fight that NETI attack dog, which is put it in service of NI instead of in service of itself. Okay, so what does this mean? The problem is, as people go through the world and talk about these things, they only have some of the analogies. They don't have them all. And it's important to have them all. You have to have all the analogies so you can see, oh, That's why that analogy doesn't actually work there. Oh, that's why that analogy doesn't actually work there. And remember, we're always arguing in analogies. Everybody is, whether they think they're not or not. When they think they are or not, when they say something like, well, we shouldn't do that because it'll just inflame the passions of others. Well, they are using an analogy of things that happen between individuals and assuming that it's sound. These metaphors we use of we and they and such, these group metaphors, they are fundamentally metaphors, and therefore, when we're using them, we're talking in analogies. But people don't understand this, and they don't understand that, in fact, the only way we ever really argue is through analogies and analogical reasoning, and that, indeed, it matters very much how much of the total pool of possible analogies you have access to, and if you can successfully taxonomy them. Certain analogies will seem to win the day in a given point and seem to be the most important thing to consider. When we're talking about gun control, for some people will just say, look, the bottom line is these things are made to kill, and they are killing people, and it makes absolutely no sense for civilized society to allow members of that society to blah, 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 right? Those are all metaphors. Remember, because we're not talking about agent, action, object, language. We're not saying an agent's actually doing something. We're talking about society doing shit, right? Society is not a moral agent. And yet it has massive moral impacts upon moral agents. That's why we have to understand why the TiNe truths must be prioritized and the truth of NE dismantling prioritized concurrently. The only way that happens is through, guess what? The simplest, truest, most correct, and only correct rights-based framework, the negative rights-based framework, is the only way that you can actually combine the two. NE has dismantled everything that fails. That's what it does. Any TI, we dismantle everything that fails. I am telling you right now, Eric Strauss, host Eric, have dismantled everything that fails. I haven't heard a new argument in ages. I know them all. Call me an arrogant fucker. I don't know. I'm not on Adderall right now, by the way. I want to stress this. This is before I've gotten any more Adderall. And I am completely unmedicated. This should be the last day of my medication break. And I want to stress that when I tell you this, I know all the arguments, I've heard all the arguments, that I've actually solved this problem by knowing all of the analogies and by dismantling everything that fails. I'm not shitting you. It's true. So, what must NETI do then? The population of intelligentsia in the country, the NTPs, the ones who sound the smartest, what must we do? We must abandon relativism. That's step number one to a successful civilization. Abandon relativism. Step number two, don't abandon dismantling everything that fails. Boom. Truth, success, glory, human achievement, enlightenment, and utopia ensue. You're welcome, world. For Attacking with Faith people, I've been host Eric. See you later.